Hello, I'm Derek with North Little Rock's Lehman Library and want to welcome you to Meet the Author. Joining us today is Deana Nall and Mike Allen, authors of A Murder in Searcy. On the morning of September 26, 1974, the body of Fern Cowan Rogers was discovered on the floor of her home in Searcy, Arkansas. The 68-year-old socialite was murdered sometime in the night. The story of the crime, investigation, and trial shocked the state and captivated the public. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you, guests, for being here.
Hey, thank you for having us today, Derek.
Okay, yeah. Why don't we begin by why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourselves? Mike, because you're on the left, why don't you start?
Sure. Hey, thanks for having us today, Derek. We're so pleased to be with you today. Let's see, where do I begin? I'm a native of Searcy, Arkansas. So I grew up in Arkansas, spent the first 25 years of my life there, 23 in Searcy, 2 in Little Rock. Joined the Air Force and have sort of bounced around the country and bounced a little bit around the world since then. I live in Northern Virginia now, married with 2 children, and have been writing in my spare time for about a dozen years or so.
All right. Deana?
And I am not from Arkansas. I'm from Beaumont, Texas, and my family moved here in 2006. So we've raised our family here. We have 2 daughters, my husband and I do. And I've done journalistic writing for close to 30 years now. I'm used to writing relatively short pieces and publishing them pretty quickly and then moving on to the next thing. So writing a book was a whole new experience for me. And then I also teach English at a local college here in Little Rock.
All right. Well, how did you hear about this murder? I'm not a native Arkansan, but this murder happened almost 50 years ago. And so it took me by surprise when I saw the book in the library. And so why don't you just tell us how you heard about it and what intrigued you about it to write a book?
Sure, I'll jump in on this one. So I was living in Searcy with my family. I was in 3rd grade when the murder took place. So, at the time, whatever that is, 8 or 9 years old or so, and it was really the talk of the town. It was the talk in my school. It was the talk at church. It was on the news. It was in the local newspaper. And from the time of the crime, really through the first trial, which lasted about 6 months, it was just this consuming topic of conversation, this consuming focus of the community. First of all, who committed the crime, and then second of all, were the people arrested, actually guilty of the crime. So I remember a lot of it from my childhood when it happened, and then I remember, years afterwards, at the dinner table with my family, it would come up as a topic of conversation. It would still come up from time to time as you might be with someone and drive past the house where this crime took place, and someone would mention, hey, that's where it happened years ago. Rogers Hospital, the building itself, stood in Searcy for many years after the hospital was no longer in operation. And so even you would have just these reminders around town, and people would continue to talk about it. And so many years later, the age of the internet, I still had a pretty healthy curiosity about it. And so from time to time, I would just go back and see what was going on or what information had surfaced. And you would see on chat boards or whatever the case may be, people were still talking about this thing that had happened. And so, fast forward to 2014, Deana and I she had done some blogging. I'd done some blogging through the years. We'd sort of met each other as a result of some blogging. And then I'd written an earlier book. And I just pitched the story idea to her and said, what do you think? What do you think about writing about this? And, fortunately, she said yes to that proposal, 2014. And then we just started building some sources and doing some writing, and we were off to the races from there.
Well, you sort of answered the question I was going to ask next. How did the two of you meet? And you sort of answered that. But along those same lines, how did the two of you work together on this book? I mean, it's sort of like, to me, like music collaborators like Rodgers and Hammerstein. I mean, who decided I will do this and I will do that? And how did you two work together to collaborate to get this book together?
That was pretty easy to work out because I live just over an hour from Searcy,
Mm-hmm.
and I live just outside of Little Rock where the state archives are. And a lot of the people who were involved in the case still live around here, or their families do. So anytime somebody needed to be interviewed, or we needed to go find something in the state archives, that was me because I'm here in Arkansas. And then Mike can talk about the things he did.
Yeah, so it was really, I would say our approach just sort of to the writing evolved over time. You know, Deana's a terrific writer, and she, was the person that was right there. And I was definitely, in the early days, I was a bit jealous because she was getting to talk to Steve Barnes and Wayne Jordan and some of these, key figures who'd been involved way back when, and either covering the trial or covering the crime and the news as it was uncovered at the time there. So anyway, and then really a lot of what you see a lot in the first part of the book, that was a lot of Deana's legwork to unearth all those details about the life of Fern and Porter Sr., and all those historic details really going all the way back to the 1930s and their life together from that time on. So I would say it was something that just evolved. And then we had, we finally put together a rough manuscript, and I don't know how many times we went through the rough manuscript. I got some other people to read it as well and just fine-tuned it. But there was a lot of rewriting and a lot of editing. And at the end of the day, it took us about 7 years from start to finish. But I felt like we worked really well together as a team.
Yeah, for several years, one of us would write a chapter and throw it in a folder. So we had this folder full of chapters that weren't in any kind of order. So yeah, that's how the manuscript came to be, is eventually we put all that in an order that seemed to make sense. And then we had a rough manuscript.
Okay. Was it difficult finding a publisher?
Well, it wasn't difficult because we self-published the book.
Oh,
so that,
okay.
that made it easy for us.
Okay.
So, it's people do ask that question a lot, Derek. And I won't say a lot. From time to time, people ask that question. And so it's a lot like putting together an indie movie or putting together indie music. It's putting together an indie book, and then just kind of putting it out there and see how it goes. And so we were fortunate in that we put out an ebook, we put out a printed copy of the book, but then we did have a publisher, an audiobook publisher, who came and purchased the rights to the audiobook. So Tantor Media is our audiobook publisher. So it's available in those three formats.
Well, I asked that question because there are a lot of potential writers who watch this program, and it's just always something I tend to want to help them, thinking of that in the back of my mind. But because this is independent, you're not the first independent publisher that I've had on the program. And so it encourages those people that, let's say, hey, I don't find a publisher that I like, or I can't find one, period. I'll see if I can do it myself. So that gives that sort of encouragement to those people that are in that situation.
Yeah. I would say there's, a lot of the books that you see nowadays are independently published. And so, there's advantages and disadvantages either way you go there. But, I would certainly, anyone who is a writer and wants to put their book out there, there's lots of avenues to do the independent publishing. And, we were able to find success by doing that.
All right, very good. I'm curious now about the meat of the book now. What did you think of Dr. Rogers and Peggy? What did you think? And then what did you think about Mrs. Rogers?
I still go back and forth one of the debates that can come out of this story is, was Peggy a gold digger? Was she the one who masterminded this whole thing? Or was it Dr. Rogers who was, steering the ship here? And I can kind of see it being both ways. And I've never been able to just land on one.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we also had Barry Kimbrell. There were three of them all involved in the plot.
Yes.
I do feel like, whoever we think spearheaded the whole plot, there were three people here, and at any given time, one of them could have stood up and said, "This is wrong. You don't need to do this." And none of those three ever did that.
Mm-hmm.
I always saw Fern Rogers as just a very respected member of the Searcy community, and very much an innocent victim.
Mm-hmm. Mike, before you make a comment, we may even get letters, but based on as I read the book and just saw, she, if I remember correctly, she controlled the purse. Now, granted, she had to, but to me, I'm not saying it was a train wreck ready to happen, but I just thought, and she didn't deserve any of this. So maybe the way I'm saying it makes it sound bad, but I just think she wasn't maybe necessarily an easy person to work with, but if only because she had to control the purse strings. And so it would make a good movie, I'll put it that way, because no one is all good or all bad, and I'm not saying she was bad, but I think you can understand the impression I'm trying to make about Mrs. Rogers.
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, sometimes as we sit here in 2022 and we think about divorce and maybe sort of how easy it is,
Mm-hmm.
it's not easy from a family standpoint, but it's easier from a legal standpoint to get a divorce nowadays as it used to be. But for Mrs. Rogers, she had been married to her husband, Dr. Rogers, for a number of years. They had two children together. They had a home together. And then, he has a very open affair.
Yes.
With a young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this idea that, okay, we'll just get a divorce, and then, half of the estate goes to him, half of the estate now also goes, if he marries Peggy, half the estate goes to her as well. I think that idea just really went against who she was as a person. I mean, I think it became a point of pride for her. And I wouldn't say it was, sometimes we can say pride in a negative sense of the word. I think it was a point of pride to just say, hey, I'm going to hold this together for my family, for my children, for my grandchildren. And there was definitely acrimony there in the marriage. There was estrangement there. So these two individuals, Porter Sr. and Fern, Mrs. Rogers, were not always nice to each other. But I just don't think that's unusual when the marriage is falling apart. And so I certainly look at her as the victim of this horrific crime. And then, I think, like you said, Derek, in the book, I think maybe not for every person in the book, maybe not for every main person that's in the book, but for some of them, you can find this mixture of good and bad. Mm-hmm. And so for Dr. Rogers, how much of him being involved in this thing is, that he has bad intent, and how much of it is that he's, potentially starting to have some memory issues, what we, refer to as, probably early dementia, mm-hmm. or signs of dementia today. So, there's different ways of looking at this, but for Mrs. Rogers, I would just say, I think she was doing what she could to sort of hold on to her good name, mm-hmm. and to hold on to this estate for her family. And then, as a result of that, there was a horrific crime that took place as a result of that.
You helped me just segue to my next question. You bring up the fact they use ink block tests and memory for design tests. I recognize your areas of expertise are not necessarily in those areas, but Do you think they were valid? Do they still use them anymore to help? Because the thing I thought of was just with any sort of insanity, although I'm not saying they were doing that for insanity, but can the defendant fool the experts? So I would appreciate your comments on ink blot tests and the memory design for design test that they did on Dr. Rogers.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was all. I'm no psychologist or haven't really studied psychology or psychiatry at all, but to me, that was all very interesting about all the testing that was done on Dr. Rogers Sr. And so, you have the defense attorney, Ed Bethune, who's trying to use this to help with an insanity defense. I think that, maybe not exactly the terms that he would have used, but he's trying to, cast some doubt on Dr. Rogers' ability to know right from wrong. And so anyway, I think the prosecution, I don't think felt too concerned about it. I think the way that they portrayed it is, hey, you've got a couple of what they would refer to as psych witnesses. You got a couple of psych witnesses that are being paid for by the defendant that are saying he didn't know right from wrong. And then you have a couple of state witnesses, who are saying he did have the ability. So they sort of saw it as a draw. They also didn't see, I think, the jury really buying into that. And I think they were right about that as well. So it was all very interesting, but I think at the end of the day, it was sort of a toss-up as to, if all of this testing was valid or not. And I think there was enough doubt there that I just don't know how, although there's a lot of testimony about it, I just don't know how seriously at the end of the day the jury took that. And you can even see in the book, you have a lead prosecutor, Gene Raff, and then you have his deputy, Robert Edwards. Both of them very good attorneys. Robert Edwards was young and not nearly as experienced as Gene Raff. But when it came to the psych witnesses, Robert Edwards was typically the guy that would be asking the questions to the psych witnesses. And so in a way, Gene Raff was saying, in effect, he was saying, hey, Robert, you can take the psych witnesses. We're not too worried about all these ink block tests and these intelligence tests. We think that's all going to sort of come out in the wash. And I think they were right about that.
I know I've had family members who've had dementia, and it's real easy to see, yeah, they do, and they say things that are out of character. So, I am sometimes tempted to think, maybe that is part of what was going on with Dr. Rogers. But we do know that way back decades earlier in the 1930s, he got involved in a counterfeiting ring.
Yes.
We know throughout their marriage, he was involved in other relationships, and we know that he made unwise decisions with money, all those years. So he had a history of decisions and behavior that were questionable long before he was older.
Yeah. And I think also, what is it? The advantage of time, in that a lot of the things that we know today about criminal investigation and about medicine and the brain, et cetera, they didn't know in the 70s. So it was just, maybe, I'm not saying it was guesswork, but they just didn't have the techniques that would make it a little bit more precise that we have today. So that's why I sort of brought this up, because it was something that was at least important for the defense at that time.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say this too, Derek, just as a quick side. So, Ed Bethune, who did a good job as a defense attorney, in my opinion, he did a good job, but he was trying out some different tactics there. He was trying the insanity defense. He would try to undermine every, witness that they had. And so, he was trying to fight this battle on multiple fronts. And one of those was with this potential insanity defense, right?
Something that caught my eye and you bring it up in the book, was that when they discovered the corpse in the house, to me, the police acted so amateurish in that they're walking around destroying potential evidence. Today, you see police, they put on those plastic things over their shoes. They don't let anyone walk around, that sort of thing. It almost struck me as being something like Barney Fife from Andy Griffith. And I don't know whether or not it was because they just didn't know as much back in the 70s, or if it was because it was a small town police force and they just didn't have the training. But I'm just interested in your comments about the way the police conducted the preliminary investigations.
Well, I think one of the reasons they're so careful today is because there's always that, the DNA that they want to preserve.
Yes.
That they didn't have that technology in
Okay.
1974. So there's that. I think back then they were probably focused on, we need to look for fingerprints and things like that.
Okay.
So,
I would say, I mean, this was, and I think you make a very good point there, Derek, but this was for the city of Searcy, this was a very high profile individual who had been murdered. There was a lot of curiosity on the part of the local law enforcement, and probably not a lot of experience, especially with the police officers, not a lot of law enforcement experience there. And so you do see, at least one of them walking around the crime scene when he probably shouldn't have been doing that. You see with the, at least one of the ambulance company members, an inappropriate act in terms of the evidence that he does while he's in the room. From all appearances, it looks like the coroner knows what he's doing and handles that professionally. And then there's definitely, once the state police arrive on the scene, there's definitely a professionalism there that kicks in. And so I had a chance to visit with Bill Bounds. He was one of the 3 people on the scene that day. And at that point, it's a good question or a good thought that you raised. I didn't even think to ask him, were you guys, wearing gloves as you were walking around or anything on your shoes? I didn't even think to ask him about that. But you can see that they are carefully identifying evidence, dropping it into envelopes or into containers or whatever the case may be there. So I do feel once the state police arrived that there was some real law enforcement professionalism taking place there. And I will say this too, I can't remember, it's funny, Deana and I were talking beforehand. It's been a year since we published the book, so we don't, some of the details are already becoming fuzzy in our minds. But I don't remember if we pointed this out clearly in the book or not, but that Searcy police officer that was walking around on the crime scene and probably shouldn't have been, he got a key tip within a week or so of the crime that really was one of the key tips that led to a key piece of evidence. And so you look at him on the one hand, potentially fouling things up, and then within a week, he gets one of the key tips that leads to a piece of key evidence for this crime. So, even though there were mistakes that were made, you can see, with that group of people, it seems like there was a real drive. Hey, let's get to the bottom of this thing. Let's see if we can solve this crime.
Okay. Well, I certainly didn't want to imply that maybe they, were bunglers, but it just struck me. So I hope that if any of them are watching this program, they won't get a feeling of insult. I didn't mean to say anything like that, but I think I think you understand that too.
Oh, absolutely. And
yeah.
I will say this, that first hour, the number of people that were in and out of that room was too many, I would say. Okay. And it looks like it was about 30 minutes before the crime was clearly communicated to the local police. So, you have the ambulance drivers, you have the person working in the home, you have the coroner who shows up at the scene, and still local police have not been notified until the coroner goes and makes the call. So, there were definitely mistakes that were made within that first, hour or so for sure.
I found the jury selection to be fascinating. just the men and women that, it seems like everybody knew the family or had heard about them. People, whether or not there was a woman, I don't have it marked, but there was a woman who they were questioning whether or not a woman could be qualified for whatever particular details. Could you discuss that just a few minutes? Because I just found the whole selection to be just interesting.
One thing that was interesting about that jury selection process, it took so long because they had such a difficult time finding people who weren't connected with the Rogers in some way.
Mm-hmm.
There were, they would ask someone, do you think you can be objective? And they would say, oh, absolutely. And then they would say, do you know Dr. Rogers? And he would say, yeah, he delivered my babies for free when I was out of a job. So they kept running into things like that, and it took, Mike, how long did it take them to get the jury? It was a long time.
Yeah, it took days, and they count those days as a part of the trial. So I forget how long the trial was exactly, but I want to say the trial maybe lasted for 3 weeks. And we would talk to people who would anecdotally say, hey, it was the longest selection of a jury that had ever taken place, in Arkansas up to that time. It was the longest trial that had ever taken place in Arkansas up to that time. I don't know that we ever confirmed that, but people would say that. So it certainly took a long time. And you can tell that I think Judge Anderson, who my opinion is that he did a very good job with the trial, but he was slower paced, I think, than other judges would have been. And I think he was worried about potential appeals that would come somewhere down the road. And so they were just very, very cautious and tread very slowly in terms of picking the jury. But I found that to be fascinating. I found we couldn't list every interview that took place. But I found there was a girl that I'd been in school with. Her mom was interviewed for the jury. I didn't know that. And so many aspects of it were interesting to me. You had people who had issues with the death penalty based on religious belief, and I found that to be interesting. Like Deana said, all these people that knew the Rogers family and had, Dr. Rogers had treated their family at lower cost or really helped them out in the past. And so, to me, it was just a fascinating slice of life of the White County community in 1975.
Along those same lines, Mike, you kind of helps me to segue to something else. Something I thought was fascinating also was the pretrial motions. It demonstrated all the details in a trial that both sides were going through. And it's something that, don't take this the wrong way, it's not a boring aspect, but it's a lot of detail that you just don't see in, let's say, like Perry Mason or Law and Order or these TV. You don't see a lot of that, but it's just, I think you did a good job of that to show how, not necessarily cat and dog, but how these two sides were going to fight to the nth degree to defend their sides. And so I thought it was very good that you brought that up in the book, is what my lumbering way of saying that, to bring it up.
Hey, Derek, the thing that I would say, again, how Deana's contributions to the project, and I've said this several times, but I found everything to be interesting. So, I would want to write about everything. And so, and Deana would come in and say, hey, in effect, I know you find everything to be interesting, but everything is not interesting. And so she was, helpful in helping us focus on not all of the details there. But I liked all that stuff, sort of all the judges' chamber stuff. And really a lot of stuff in the judges' chambers that, if you go back and you read the newspaper articles, if someone has a subscription to newspapers.com or something like that, you won't find those details in the newspapers. It just didn't come out. It was all, fortunately it was there in the court transcript, and we were able to get a copy of the transcript through the Arkansas Supreme Court, an information request there. So we felt very fortunate about that.
I don't have your I don't know if you have the book in front of you, but on page 261 and 262, Dr. Rogers says he was abused by the police. He said he was anyway. What do you think? Do you think he was? Do you think he was abused by the police? Because I think I'm sorry. Go continue.
I was just going to say that that's something I always had trouble believing. Whenever I would come across that part, I would think it would just always strike me as some desperate attempt of his to get out of having to face responsibility for what he had done.
Yeah, I would say we certainly never talked to anyone or found any evidence of physical abuse. And I'll tell you this too, from talking to people and looking through all the documents, the person who was running the criminal investigation division at the time, W.A. Tudor, seemed to be just a very by the book person. Now that, being extremely by the book, at least according to his reputation, that didn't always go over so well. He and Jim Lester, who was the criminal investigator in Searcy at the time, clashed fairly often. But I certainly don't think that Major Tudor would have condoned physical abuse. But there were indications as we talked to people of, and even Ed Bethune brings this up at trial, that he felt that there was pressure exerted on Dr. Rogers. And there was some speculation along the way. Jim Lester was a Mason, Dr. Rogers was a Mason, and that there was potentially there was some use of Masonic signs or Masonic talk to help loosen Dr. Rogers up. I don't know that would be considered. I don't think that would be considered illegal. Potentially an ethical question would come to mind if exerting that type of pressure. But if there was some verbal pressure applied in terms of an interview or interrogation, I don't think that it would be anything outside the lines back then, and I don't know that it'd be anything outside the lines today at all. One small side note is that during the course of the trial, Ed Bethune would try to use the word interrogation, and the prosecution or the state police would almost always push back and say it wasn't an interrogation, it was an interview, it was a police interview. And so even that type of language, I thought, to me was interesting, just to see how the police did want to portray it as an interview, it's a question and answer time, almost a conversation versus an interrogation, which carried, this idea of pressure or a heavier weight there as well.
Yeah. Yes. So I guess based on that one answer, because I was getting ready to say that about interview, interrogation, it's who you want to ask is going to determine, or who you get the answer from is going to determine whether or not he was abused or not, and how you believe, etc. So, but I was just, like I said, he brought it up and you wrote the book, and I was just intrigued to see what you thought. And I think you've done a very good job of explaining your points of view and letting the audience know that there was obviously no physical abuse and probably not really any abuse of even a psychological basis, or at least that's the way I interpret it from
right.
So,
And I'll add this as well. We were very fortunate, and then we got to talk to some of the state police investigators, and one of those men was Jerry Reinhold, who has since he's since passed away. But we had a chance to visit with him, and he was not in the hotel room while Jim Lester and Dr. Rogers Sr. were talking about potentially what took place, but he was in the hotel room that day.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to just in effect say, things were pretty relaxed atmosphere in the room. Not a lot of pressure in that room when the three of them were sitting in there together. And so maybe just an indication of the atmosphere in the room on the day that Dr. Rogers eventually goes in for his final police interview.
Okay. All right. Okay. If you'll permit me, I want to read something from your book. It's on page 294, and something I almost laughed out loud when I read this. And it's obviously at the end of the book. It says, a short time later, Judge Anderson addresses the jury, wrapping up another full week. And I quote, "I had my doubts that we would ever reach this point." And I wanted to laugh because I thought he is really almost sarcastic, almost witty, that this has just been dragging on and on and on and on. What was your impression of Judge Anderson is, I guess, what I want to say. I found it amusing, that statement.
I can only imagine what it was like to be, a judge or an attorney or somebody involved in this trial, because I'm sure there were times where it did seem like it would never end, especially if you read some of Dr. Rogers' testimony. The first time I read through his testimony, I had to go take a break. I had to go just sit in a chair and not think about anything for a while. It just completely wore me out to read some of the circles he was trying to get people to go around in. So yeah, I can see that too, where the judge was just saying, yeah, I never thought this would happen, but here we are.
Yeah, he definitely seemed to be a good-natured man. I mean, I think his career, he was more of a plodder, Plodder. I think that's
okay.
not plotter, but plodder. Like he plodded along. He wasn't a superstar in the Arkansas legal system or anything like that. And he really took his time. And this is probably a trial where you needed to take your time. He was very even-handed in the way that he handled it. So I had a good impression of him. And then just, as Deana and I were doing the research, one day I came across, it was a publication. I forget when Judge Anderson passed. I want to say maybe in the 90s, but I don't remember for sure. But it was an Arkansas legal publication, and it had a 2 or 3, maybe a 2-paragraph obituary for Judge Anderson, and it mentioned the Rogers trial as a part of that obituary to him. I think it was the only mentioned that he had been a judge and what he had done, but it was only the only specific thing that was mentioned about him. And then, as it is with the internet, I went back at some point later on, and I never could find that again. Like I read it one time, I read it, and then I never could find it again. But anyway, I would say from a professional career point of view, this is probably the highlight of his career as a judge, that he oversaw this trial.
After it's all over, I came to such an emotional letdown when I found out that Peggy was paroled after 6 years. I couldn't believe it. How did that happen?
Didn't really call it a plea deal, but there's that letter from her attorney, Jack Holt, that explains basically if you are willing to cooperate and testify against Dr. Rogers, then we'll take that into consideration at sentencing.
Okay.
So I'm guessing that's why her time was so short in prison.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. Go continue.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say it's a when you look at it from a justice point of view, the 3 people that were arrested for the crime, and then how that played out for all 3 of them. She was the first one she was the only one to jump in and fully cooperate with the prosecution. And then at the time, we had a really good source that who knew a lot about the law in the 1970s. We had a couple of really good sources. And he was explaining it to me one day, and he said, hey, it was very clear cut back then where if it was first degree murder, it was going to be, I believe he said it was going to be a life sentence. If it was second-degree murder, it was a 21-year max. And if you got the 21-year max and you had good behavior, it was going to, you were going to come way down off of that 21 years. And so they knew when Peggy pled guilty to second-degree murder, at the time, the prosecution knew that was going to be probably 6 or 7 years for her. And I believe she was incarcerated the whole time, that whole first year. And so that time counted. So her first year in the White County jail, that counted. And so then it was whatever it was after that, 5, 6, 7, 7 years after that, she was out.
Is she still around?
Was paroled out of state and went on and lived her life. I did contact her early in the process to see if we wanted to give her the chance to contribute. And the way I explained it to her was, people who know this story, as soon as you're paroled, your story ends right there. And would you like the chance to tell the rest of your story, like the rest of your life? And she did think about it for a while, but then at the end of the day, she really didn't want to have any part of it. So,
okay, all right.
But yeah, she is still living. And had a whole other life after that. So.
Okay, all right. Well, okay. I want to ask a question about the cover of your book, and I'm gonna hold it up. This is the house. Is it still there in Searcy? I mean, I'm sure the people, if it's there, the owners wouldn't like it, but could you drive by and see the house?
It is not still there.
Oh,
Derek.
okay.
So
Okay.
It's, the house was torn down by the family.
Okay.
And so it's on, what I call Race Street. I think, what I call Race Street. It's, East Race Avenue or whatever it's called nowadays, but it's on Race Street and it's an empty lot.
Okay.
And so, from a standpoint of prime real estate in Searcy, it's prime real estate, but it is a vacant lot. So if you drive down Race Street today, it's a vacant lot. But then on one side of the lot, there are these two brick pillars standing up, and that was the entrance to the driveway. Okay. And so for whatever reason, those are still intact, and that's all that's left of the house. And then right next to where the house was is what's called the Black House, and that's the that's the Searcy Art Gallery that's in that house.
Okay, all right. Well, this has been a wonderful experience for me, for the viewers. If they want to contact you, are either or both of you in social media in any way?
I'm on Facebook as Deana Hamby Nall. It's my maiden name. And also on Instagram. So those are the two places I mostly hang out on social media.
Okay. And Mike?
I'm on social media. Most of my social media is private. So
okay.
We do have, if someone picks up the book and they get all the way to the end, or if they want to read the last chapter first, we do have an email address in the very back of the book. And so people can contact us through that email address. We try to check that every week or so. Okay. So we are responsive to emails if people want to email and get in touch with us through that. Okay.
If people want to buy a copy of the book, is Amazon the best way to find it, or is there another source that you can recommend so that if they want to buy a copy?
Amazon's the way to go. There are a couple of Arkansas bookstores that are stocking it, but Amazon's the easiest way to go.
Okay, all right. Well, very good. All right.
And then Audible has the audiobook as well, if people are interested in that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great pleasure. It really has. So I'll conclude by saying thank you for joining us today. It has been a pleasure. If you're interested in reading more from Deana Nall, or Mike Allen, please visit us at the library or find us online at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or our website, nlrlibrary.org. And join us again next time, and have a great day, everyone. And once again, thank you so much. I think this interview went great.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, yes.